Good morning. Welcome to another Bible study as we will be looking at the gospel lesson for the third Sunday of Easter. And we are in Luke's gospel now. Last week, for the second Sunday of Easter, we were reading an account from John's gospel. Hopefully you'll have the notes in front of you, as I think that'll be important. I'll have the notes on the webpage under the resources and worship tab, and then Sunday morning worship. And I'll also have the notes on our Facebook group page. It'll be listed under the files. So when you look to the left, when you're on the Lutheran Memorial Church group webpage, just look to the left, you'll see a series of tabs. Find files, and then you can open it up. It'll be in PDF, so that should not be an issue. Open it up and you can follow along and then do some further study after our time together. This will be, again, no more than a half an hour, because any more than that just makes it more difficult to upload to YouTube. And it's probably good for all of us that it doesn't go on beyond that. I wanted to lay out, before we jumped into the Luke text, a study that I came across and I've always been interested in, is looking at all of the resurrection appearances that Jesus makes. And I don't know if you've ever really thought of it before, but we have the resurrection and then we have the ascension. And between those 2 days, Jesus is encountering people. It's kind of neat to see the patterns of those appearances and who he's appearing to and in what books of the Bible it's found. So what I did was I found a study that was detailed by Monsignor Charles Pope, and I'm going to read just an opening paragraph to introduce why this is important. When we encounter the resurrection accounts in the New Testament, we face a challenge in putting all the pieces together in a way that the sequence of the events flows in logical order. It is my practice that when I am reading a particular gospel or a letter of St. Paul, I am not attempting to read into that gospel or letter another gospel or letter. Each of the Gospels has its own writer as inspired by God and is being written to a particular group of people. What follows is an accounting of the resurrection appearances of Jesus, but please understand what follows is a rough attempt at doing something that I don't normally do, of harmonizing the Gospels or the book of Acts and the letters of Paul. So with that important, of course, disclaimer, what follows can be helpful in seeing on a list of the resurrection appearances of Jesus. There are limits, of course, to what can we expect of the scriptural account, and fitting perfectly into a time frame and logical sequence is not what the text primarily proposed to do. Yet, such a chronological sequence can be helpful, and it's in that spirit that this is being presented to you today. And again, as I noted, that the sources of this listing come from the detailed work of Monsignor Charles Pope, and I thank him for doing the work and also providing it for our reflection today. So please note that this past Sunday's gospel that I had said just before was from John chapter 20, verses 19 through 31, which, as you will see below, includes both appearance 6 from John 20, 19 through 25, so the first half of that gospel, and then appearance 7 from John 20, 26 through 31, which was actually 1 week later. So it may not have been apparent in last week's gospel that it included scenes from 2 different weeks. Although I do remember Michael Snyder in his sermon commenting that it was a different week and kind of wondering why Jesus had that time apart. But I was not able to pick up in my looking at the gospel lesson last week that full gospel that was our Sunday worship is actually split into those 2 separate weeks. So this Sunday's gospel, April 26th, is from Luke 24, 13 through 35, which is appearance number 3. So although it appears as if we're jumping back to a previous appearance, which we are by reading the appearance list literally, it's more important for us to know is that the appearance in our gospel lesson for this Sunday comes from Luke as opposed to last week John's gospel. And second, that the gospel happens on the day of Jesus' resurrection. So when Luke's gospel for this Sunday begins with the words, "Now on that same day," the day is the first day of the first week, which is the day that Jesus is raised. So as you will see on your notes, it is broken out into sections, the morning of day one, and a very thorough study. It gives you the biblical references that I entrust to your care. You can spend some time, quite a bit of time, studying this document and getting comfortable with it. You may find some disagreement that you have with Monsignor's analysis of it, but it's there to at least get us reading, opening the Bible, investigating, questioning, and it's just a wonderful resource for us to become more intimate with the resurrection appearances. Again, you have the first part on morning day one. You flip down to number 2. You have the afternoon and evening of day one. And then you'll notice that, again, I had reference up top that our gospel lesson for Jesus is appearance 3, which is on the way to Emmaus. So that's where that fits in, and then you'll notice the other appearances continuing on through appearance 6. Then there's an interlude, number 3. 4 is 1 week later, Sunday 2, which again is appearance 7 to the apostles. This time Thomas is with them, right? So he calls Thomas to faith, who now confesses Jesus as Lord, which comes from John's gospel, which we read last week. Then there's number 5, there's interlude number 2. And then I like number 6, sometime later. That kind of sounds like a movie text. Sometime later. Appearances 8, 9, and 10. And then the rest of the 40 days in number 7. And then the final appearance and the ascension in section 8, which ends up with appearance 12. So if you're following this list literally, again with those disclaimers that I made at the beginning, you'll learn that Jesus has 12 appearances. Now, I'm not one necessarily to lock onto numbers, although there are biblical numbers. Appearance 12 to the 12. So anyway, if you're on Jeopardy, maybe you'll get asked that question and you'll win a lot of money. And remember, you got to tithe that, so we'll get a big amount here at Lutheran World Church. All right, so the readings for the third Sunday of Easter are Acts 2, 14a, 36 through 41. And by the way, I never like when the lectionary people split up verses. You know, rather than just include all of verse 14, they try to get clever and they just split it up. But I guess it's for the easy point of reading. That's fine. Psalm 116, 1 Peter 1, and Luke 24, 13 through 35. Now, I'm going to pause for just a minute, stop the video. I want you to read the gospel. I have failed to do that in previous Bible studies, or at least give you the time. So I'm going to stop now, pause it, read it, and then we'll come back. Okay, so you should be back. You had read Luke 24, 13 through 35, which is good. And then you'll also notice at the end of the gospel, there's some discussion questions for Easter that if we have some time, we'll come back to, at least 1 or 2 of them, so we can think about how this gospel meets up with our lives. So let's jump into the text for Luke 24. Our reading is the story of the walk to Emmaus. It occurs right after the Easter narrative in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 24, 1 through 12, and it takes place in the day later on Easter Sunday. This story is only found in Luke's Gospel. So that's an interesting thing to remember and to learn today. Only this Emmaus story is found in Luke's Gospel. Also, a digression, there is just some beautiful artwork that has the scene when Jesus is at the tables with with those he is walking with. Jesus is invited into their homes, and then, as you read in the gospel, they break bread, and then the scriptures are opened up to them. It's just some beautiful artists have done some beautiful scenes. And whenever I'm in an art museum, which is not a lot, but whenever I am, I try to discover if there is an artist that had done this Emmaus scene. The story begins abruptly with the words, two of them, who are on the road to Emmaus, but who are these persons? There is no clear antecedent to them in 24, 1 through 12. They're clearly not part of the 11 within the original circle of the 12, since the story ends with them going to report to the 11 with what had happened. So that happens in Luke 24:33. So that's how you're able to, so these two are not part of the 11 or the original 12, because it says in 24:33, reporting to the 11 what had happened. Yet, they are a part of a group of disciples in 24:9, to which the women also belong who had gone to the tomb, and three of whose names are provided in 24:10, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women. Remember, there are the 12, but there are other disciples as well. And just to be attentive to that, and as I shared in a couple Bible studies ago, the role that women play, the importance that women play, I have always considered them to be disciples of Jesus, because they are the ones who remain faithful, and they are the ones who are given that revelation. In addition to the women, some of this group also visited the tomb on Easter morning. That's in Luke 24:24. Subsequently, and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. The risen Christ. We are given the name of one of the two on the road to Emmaus. His name is Cleopas, 24:18, but he shows up nowhere else within the New Testament. The first part of the story, 24:13 through 27, so this gospel is in parts, and it's kind of nice to read them in parts and maybe mark a line where you can see the change of the scenes, or the change of the characters, or the change of the location. And so in the first part, these two persons have no idea who Jesus was when he approached them. He must have had normal human features, not superhuman, right? So that's important about the resurrection of the body. Another way that we affirm within the creed, the body is raised. He's not some superhuman, unrecognizable person. They, of course, didn't know it was Jesus, but they recognized him as a person. But the difference is that he is a resurrected person, a resurrected body. And so they do not even catch onto his identity when he interpreted Moses and all the prophets concerning himself in 24:27. They are aware, however, of the recent events within Jerusalem. They recite, of course, to Jesus a brief summary of his earthly career, and quote, a prophet mighty in word and deed, his passion and his death. That follows in 24:19 through 20. They also know the essential Easter story. What they say in 24:22 through 24 is a brief recounting of the Easter narrative that we found in 24:1 through 12, right? So they're giving a summary. So they, of course, heard it, and they're recapping it. It is in the second part of the story, 24:28 through 35, that the identity and the significance of the stranger becomes known to the travelers on the road. They are gathered at the table, and their guest took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. That's in 24:30. The words are almost identical to those in 22:19 at the Last Supper, which says, he took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to them. Their likeness is even clearer within the Greek language. Only the tenses, imperfect or past, and modes of indicative or participle of otherwise identical verbs differ. So surely the Eucharistic symbolism is intentional, for in fact, interpreters have pointed out that worship practices in the early church have affected the telling of the story. Again, a really important remembrance of how that Eucharist, the meal of thanksgiving, ties back again to Luke 22 when he's with his disciples, with the 12, and then as now he dies and he's resurrected, how that meal, that Eucharist, the meal of thanksgiving, continues, and then it is the mode by which that we as a community of faith are connected to the risen Lord through the meal of thanksgiving, through the Eucharist, which is that importance of bodily presence within a worshiping community. And, whatever our future is here at Lutheran World Church with this online gift that we've had, it's beautiful, and it's allowed us to stay connected to a ministry that we care about very much. But one of the things that we're going to always need to wrestle with is how we're providing online resources, right, to those who are not able to come here for many different reasons, while never negating the importance of coming into a place and being connected with one another physically and receiving bread and wine physically as well. So that's going to be one of those ongoing things that we as a ministry are going to need to deal with as we continue to wrestle with how to respond to this virus, to be responsible citizens and people of faith, while also knowing the importance of gathered face-to-face in community to receive bread and wine. Okay, that's my little soapbox there. The event is on Sunday, and it involves the interpreting of Scripture, proclamation, and sacrament. It is in that event that the two disciples understand who the stranger is. They now know it is Jesus, who vanishes from them. They recall that their hearts burned within them while they had been teaching concerning the Messiah on the road to Emmaus. The story ends with the two men going to Jerusalem to report what had happened, but before they can do that, they hear the testimony of the 11 who say that Jesus had been raised and appeared to Simon. The statement functions to place Peter as the first believer in the risen Christ, the first apostle. The story has theological significance on 3 levels. First, like the lesson from last Sunday, it demonstrates that belief in Jesus as a risen Lord was not self-evident to his earliest followers, even after his crucifixion and resurrection. The reason why people back then came to believe in him was that he appeared to them. In other words, it took a divine revelation for them to believe. That was true for Peter in 24:34, and it was true for the men who traveled on the road to Emmaus. So one of the questions that I have and have always had and will always have, and perhaps you have had this question as well, is why is it that some people believe and some people don't? Martin Luther explained it also well in his explanation to the 3rd article of the Apostles' Creed in a small catechism, for there he says that we cannot believe by our own reason and strength, but as by the Holy Spirit that comes for us to be able to believe. Now, a little bit of a shout out to my colleague and friend, a friend of this ministry and member, Pastor Roy Walshall. Those of you who know him would maybe know that this is just his favorite part of the catechism. At least I believe it to be. Roy, if I'm wrong, I apologize. But I remember him sharing with me that when he was teaching catechism, he would make sure that his students would have that 3rd part memorized. That importance of the Holy Spirit leading us to belief, encouraging us in belief, and that power, again, that comes from the triune God, pulling us into relationship. Second, the setting for most persons to come to faith is Christian worship, which includes Scripture, proclamation, and sacrament, right? So when you think of our worship service, these are the key elements of what a worship service is. Scripture, proclamation, and sacrament. This is also where faith is received and sustained. It is the place where Jesus continues to reveal himself. The Christian faith is born and nurtured where people share in worship through word, gesture, and earthly means, such as water, bread, wine, and these tactile expressions of mutual care, the smile, the clasp of another's hands, well before the virus, and perhaps even an embrace. I really cannot stress enough. I do not know what the future of Lutheran World Church is. I don't know the details of what the Christian church looks like, numbers of buildings and worship practices, all those types of details. That is beyond me. I do know the church will always be the church because it requires word and sacrament. And if that happens in a small room in a home of where 5 are gathered, or in a beautiful church building like we have presently today with hundreds, that's up to the Lord. But I cannot stress enough the importance of sometimes being pulled into community. I know on Sunday morning or Wednesday evening or whenever we have stuff at the church, we just kind of want to stay home and we don't want to be bothered to go. We have other things going on. We're exhausted, and I get it. I understand. But I have to believe, and I think you can probably agree with me on this, that those times that you've resisted going somewhere where the word was proclaimed and the Eucharist received, that when you left there, you're glad that you were there. Also, sometimes there's maybe Sundays that we may not hear anything particular that was very helpful. I know that too. But then there's that one Sunday where you're sitting in community and you hear exactly what it is that you needed to hear. And you were connected to somebody that you needed to be connected with. So as I shared just a few moments ago, whatever the future is after this virus, when we get back to normal, I really need to stress the importance of gathering within community to receive these signs of grace. Finally, number 3. The story for today is one of movement. It contains at least 9 verbs describing movement. This is kind of neat. The 2 men are going, 24:13. Jesus came near and went with them, 24:15. They came near Emmaus, 24:28. Jesus walked ahead of them, 24:28. He went also to stay with them, 24:29. He vanished from their sight, 24:31, and they got up and returned to Jerusalem, 24:33. Some of these verbs tell of movements made by Jesus. Others tell of the 2 men. Either way, both Jesus and his followers are on the move. But it is not movement for its own sake. This is really great. The moves being made have a purpose, and that is to tell the story of Jesus, to interpret it, to have fellowship, communion with Jesus and others, and to share it with others. This is what it means for us in being the church. So, so many of us are so busy. We're moving everywhere. And maybe one of the blessings of this whole experience with the virus is that we've not been able just to move helter-skelter, right? We've been forced to stay at home. Very uncomfortable for many of us because we're so used really to do, go. But one of the things that this Bible study provided me to think about is the importance of movement, but purposeful movement, right? I only have so many hours of the day. I only have so many ways that I can be within community, so much time. So this has allowed me to think in a way of what am I really doing? Where am I spending my time? Is it time that is spent giving life, modeling and proclaiming the gospel? Sure, I'm going to go to the movies like everybody else or a sporting event. Those things are fun. but really to think about our lives, and when we get back to normal, are we going to continue some of the practices that we did before that we're not very happy with? Are we going to continue to isolate ourselves from community and from one another? Or are we going to remember the gift that we have been given to be with one another, to receive this word and sacrament? So, final 2 paragraphs, and then we'll look at the reflection questions. As a recap, Jesus meets the two on the way. He doesn't come to them in Jerusalem. He doesn't wait for them at home. He doesn't bid them by making some holy pilgrimage or undertaking some pious feat, but rather he meets them where they are, on the road, amid their journey, right smack in the middle of all the pain and the frustration that threatens in overwhelming them, even though they don't recognize him. And it's not a bad pattern for us to emulate, is it? Meet people where they are. Open up the scriptures so that they can make sense of their lives in light of God's mercy. Gather them to the meal that they might behold and be nourished by Christ's own presence. And then send them away back into the world and partnering with God's work and to share God's grace. It is not simple, of course. The responsibilities that we shoulder in this are significant. And finding time to dwell in the world and to open it up with care and creativity can at times for all of us be tremendously daunting. But if we're honest with ourselves, the work that God has given us is with purpose and has great depth. It is good work. It is holy work. And is worth work that is worth giving our lives to. All right, so let's look at discussion question number 1, because it captures, that should be Luke 24, 13 through 35, not 34. Anyway, the question is, when has God revealed something to you that changed your behavior, thinking, or faith? When has God revealed something to you that has changed your behavior? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure, I know I have some. I'm not prepared to share what that is with you as of this point. But I do know with some reflection this week, as I move and we move together towards Sunday, that I will have several things thought of. In your time today, why don't you think about some of those things, write them down. And after you see what that list is like, offer a word of praise and gratitude for Jesus' presence and walking with you in that and guiding you into a life of grace and faith. So I wish all of us well. We're going to keep at this. The spiritual disciplines are critical to our life of faith. Maybe, again, one of the positive things that is coming out of this for all of us is forcing us to understand this need for the Word and the disciplines of course, daily prayer. I will, of course, be providing along the way when we get back to normal ways that you will and we will continue to do this together, to not just sort of go back to our old practices without some critical thought of what we are doing and why we are doing it, and are we benefiting, and are others benefiting from our many movements within life. So be well, keep up the good life of faith, and give thanks to God for this beautiful day. Amen.